We have a Mad Hatter professor who has to hurry to a very important date. His entire institute's budget is being reviewed by a dean, and
that's serious.
that's serious. So this is Professor Henry, well, this guy is Professor Henry Louis Gates Jr., known as Skip to pretty much everybody. And this other guy is our mystery guest, who will, so I think I'm going to concentrate on Skip first because he has to leave. So let me, one of the questions that people ask is like, what is this good for? And we already know one thing, that for human beings, the chance to look backwards and ask who made me, who made the people who made me, who made the people who made the people who made me, and who made the people who made the people who made the people who made me, is a question of extraordinary interest. And in Skip's case, here's a moment. I'm reading from something he wrote. If you think about it, your ultimate act of genealogy is the relationship between you and your parents. You receive half your genome from your mom, half from your dad. So we were able to see, he's now talking about his experience here, exactly what I inherited from my father, which is amazing, and then by subtraction they recreate what I inherited from my mother. My father cried, and I found it deeply and profoundly moving. Why did your dad cry?
Well, my mother died in 1987, and my father's will be, God willing, 97 on June 8th. He plays bridge 6 days a week, has a cute little 70-year-old girlfriend. I'm hoping I inherited that gene from my dad. And we love my mother. She was the center of our family. I have one brother, Dr. Paul Gates, the chief of oral surgery at Bronx Lebanon Hospital. She was a goddess. But she's, gone. And so I got to know George Church very well and Eric Lander. And as some of you know, I've been doing these series on genealogy and genetics over the last 5 years. African American Lives, I did 2 of those. And, we did the mitochondrial DNA and the Y-DNA of men, or males related to the women of people like Oprah Winfrey and Quincy Jones. Then we decided to expand the brand because I got a letter from a woman of Russian Jewish ancestry, and she said, why do these black people have all the fun? Why don't you do somebody like me? And I thought, wow, expand the brand, why not? So I took the Noah approach, 2 Jews, 2 Muslims, 2 Latinos. And I hooked up with and George and Eric, and we were playing with different ideas, and I realized, actually, I got the idea of the Genome people were on a plane with me on the shuttle from Boston to New York. And when I got off, they were waiting, and they said, we want to work with you, we love your series. And I was just putting together what became Face of America. And as I walked out, I sent an email to my fellow executive producers. I said, we could take this series all the way to the limit. We can sequence 2 of our guest genomes. And Eric was very good at hooking me up with Lumina and negotiating. We put together this great package when we decided to sequence 2 people and do dense genotyping for all my other guests. And then with George and Eric through the Broad Institute, we decided to do, I innocently asked David Altshuler and Mark Daly, is there a counterintuitive way that we can show recent shared ancestry through tests not available on the market? And they looked at each other and said, sure. So I call it autosomal cousins, right? And then we did that, which was the high point for each of my guests in Faces of America when, let's say, Yo-Yo Ma and Eva Longoria realized that they shared 6 million base pairs on chromosome 13. I'm making that up, but it was, it was quite a lot. So that they, which as you know, means that they could have had a common ancestor as recently as 250 years. That is really dramatic. It's one thing to talk about you're in the same haplogroup 16,000 years ago. People go, oh, yeah, wow, that's interesting. But, but as soon as I could put 250 years in there, all of a sudden, because we were giving them family trees that went back 500 years, in some cases 1,000 years, quite extraordinarily. So all of a sudden, we could say, if we could do an ideal family tree for Yo-Yo Ma and Eva Longoria, there'd be one light on both that would overlap, that would light up. There would be one common ancestor, maybe since the time of Columbus. That's interesting. That's compelling. So I had to decide whose genome would be fully sequenced. Now, I knew one person's genome was going to be fully sequenced, and that would be the executive producer, me. So I was thinking, boy, it would be fun to hook up with Eva Longoria and have both of our genomes sequenced. You know what I'm talking about? But then I thought, I asked George, has there ever been a father and son? And I wanted to immortalize my dad. You know, every day, basically, whenever my brother calls, I'm afraid it's the call. Daddy died last night. I mean, you know, it's got to happen. And I thought, and Daddy is 96 and a half, and we could make his genome public. And my friend Jim Watson had done that. And what the hell could Daddy have that would be embarrassing? He's 96 and a half, right? And so George said, well, there are no African Americans who have had their full genome sequenced. And I went, oh. And then he said there are no fathers and sons. So you could make history twice, and you could immortalize your father. Well, when they did the reveal on camera, which many of you saw, and we did a bit of a cheat in the script, but Nathan Pearson took he said, this is your dad's genome. This is your genome. Basically, they subtracted me from my dad, and we got 50% of my mother's genome. But you see, it's just a bunch of bands and a bunch of colors, but I'm telling you, it was like my mother coming back from the grave. And I fought back tears. And George spontaneously says, you see, most people don't think that these kind of data can have an emotional contact, but it really did. I swear to God, it was like having my mother right there in the room. And my brother joined the Personal Genome Project, so when he gets his genome sequenced, we'll have 75% of my mother's genome.
But why would a sequence of shadows on a screen or a sequence of letters on a page feel like the woman you knew and loved?
What's a photograph? I studied, I went to Yale as an undergraduate, and I was madly in love with Linda Darling, who's a now famous professor at Stanford. We were the big junior year item. The only way I could get close to her was take a picture all day long, so I studied photography. You see, I'm a very practical man. And what I learned in that photography course, we learned something called the zone system, which they don't even teach anymore. Ansel Adams and Minor White. You think of those big black and white photographs. If you look at them closely, they're not about the Rocky Mountains. They're about shades of gray. There are 9 shades of gray on a piece of photographic paper. And Ansel Adams' genius is that he can manipulate them so he gets detail in the darks and detail in the lights. Well, I keep a picture of my mother, 2 pictures in my living room. And I look at them and I get emotional. But is that my mother? It's a metaphor. It's no different in terms of its genre than the representation of her genome. It's just that we have to learn how to, the first group of human beings had to learn how to read a photograph. And there are many stories from anthropologists, when they show, say, people in Africa the photographs, they go, what the hell is that? You know, you have to learn how to see it. Well, likewise, we have to learn how to read the representation of our genome, but it's something you could do automatically. I mean, the way they did it with the slides disappearing, it's just like my mother came out of the screen, man. I can't explain it, but you can watch it in episode 4 of Faces of America. It really was a quite emotional thing for me.
What if it goes the other way? You probably read the Havasupai story in the New York Times last week, which is a group of Indians in the bottom of the Grand Canyon who thought that they were giving their blood to a description of their sugar problems, blood, and ended up getting a story about themselves that didn't give them pleasure. A story that. What happens when the story that stares at you isn't warm, but is actually sort of a stab in the heart?
But I thought that their problem was that they had not authorized the tests that had been done.
That's what they say.
Yeah. Well, I think that was irresponsible science. I think that they should have been asked, and they should have had the right to deny permission for subsequent testing. I think that I admired the way that George, the PGP people, Illumina, and the Broad, all, when I got my the results, there were 2 medical doctors there, including Dr. Joe Thakorias, who was in the room. And we did it privately at my house first, before I decided what would be filmed. Because what more intimate information could one possibly reveal about herself or himself? So I think the protocols to be observed are very, very important. And I think the people who exploited I'm all for science. I'm glad that they, in effect, did what they did, except they missed the crucial step, which was getting consent, informed consent. And it's tough to get informed consent. I think I'm a reasonably intelligent person, but it took me a long time. I actually took 2 genetics courses. I took the PGP course online, got 100, as George will tell you. And then I went to the teaching company. Those teaching company ads you see, like in the Sunday Times, I ordered their intro genetics thing. When I'm flying around on the plane, I was popping those DVDs in and making notes and trying to memorize the manuals about genetics because I thought that's what I needed to do. One, to be an effective host for, and then I've written a couple books about this now. And two, for myself. You know, I needed to understand what the hell it was that I was getting my father and myself, my brother, and I have 2 daughters. And I'm revealing half of theirs, you know, their genome.
I'm wondering, in terms of genealogy, is having genomes really that much more important as opposed to just looking at a much smaller bit of DNA, just looking at some genetic markers? You can learn a lot from the older things, but what are you getting in terms of genealogy and ancestry by actually looking at whole genomes now?
Well, as you know, most people take a mitochondrial DNA test, and then the second most popular test is the Y-DNA test. And then if you can pony up $400 and get to 23andMe, you'll get an admixture test, right? So that gives you a certain kind of information going back a certain length of time. But you get the whole kit and caboodle with the genome. And you get different measurements of time, different depth, different information. Certainly, God knows there's no test that gives you all that medical information. So for me, they're part and parcel of the same larger narrative of one's identity. Curiously, when I conceived of the series, I got up to go to the bathroom, I swear to God, in the middle of the night. And I've been fascinated with my family tree since July 2nd, 1960, which was the day Edward St. Lawrence Gates was buried. And that was my father's father. He looked like a white man. And after we buried him, he was so white, we used to call him Casper behind him. And it turns out through the series, through testing, we found out that family legend was true, that Jane Gates, a slave, was impregnated by an Irishman. I have the O'Neill haplotype, right? But I also, to my shock, have my mitochondrial DNA is T2. I am in the 1% of the African American people who, if you look at me, if you look at the lab results, I'm a white man. My mitochondrial DNA goes back to Europe, and my Y-DNA goes back to Europe. And you all know 35% at least of all African American men. If we tested the Y-DNA of all the black men in the NBA, at least 35% have a Y-DNA that goes to Europe, most likely the United Kingdom, which is a huge shock to most people. But when I conceived of the series, it really was the Kunta Kinte moment. Oprah would spit, we'd swab Oprah's cheek, and there's some tribe magically on the other end of this laboratory process, some tribe would come up, and I would reveal Oprah Winfrey's tribe to the whole world. And that's how I sold it. Those series cost $6 million a pop. So I've done 3 of them, and then I did one special on Oprah, so it's $21 million. I had to go raise that money. So I walked in after Oprah had agreed. Quincy Jones agreed. He hooked me up with, gave me Oprah's secret address, and I wrote to her. I said, would you get Oprah to do it? He said, no, but he said, write to her. So I wrote to her, and about a week later, Quincy's name popped up on my cell phone. And I said, Q, what's happening? And it was a deep woman's voice. Said, Dr. Gates, this is Oprah Winfrey. I was like, thank you, Jesus. Because people don't call you with bad news. They only call you with good news. And my agent taught me that. I said, did the publisher call? She goes, honey, he ain't going to call. You ain't going to get the contract. So I walk into Coca-Cola, I swear to God, and I said, how would you like to have your product associated with the whole world, knowing the tribe Oprah Winfrey's descended from in Africa on her mother's side? Ladies and gentlemen, see that ceiling? It's like the ceiling part of a big ATM machine. You got 6 million? Is that all you need? But that's not the part. When I actually filmed the series, I thought the emotional peak would be the revelation of their genetic ancestry. It wasn't. The emotional peak was finding lost ancestors by name on their family tree. And so when I told people, this is your haplogroup, oh, it's fine. And then, you get in this little thing, in the Ice Age, and blah, 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 and you go, tell me about that slave you found and that white man who impregnated, So then I kept thinking, how can I make the genomic data more, not sexier, but more relevant? It's not that it's not relevant. It's got to be relevant in the person's perception. You can reach out and touch your family tree. Mine hangs in the kitchen of my house right in Harvard Square. And so does right next to my genetic results. But I feel much more emotionally attached to the actual human beings on my family tree by name than I even do to my genetic results.
But the deeply kind of wonderful thing that's happened here is after a really long time of DAR-like sort of pride, whereas I'm from the Mayflower, only from the Mayflower, I am pristine, and you can follow me all the way back to the white lady who came off the boat, or whatever.
Right.
Or, you know, in Kunta Kinde's case, like try to take me back to my, you know, my African ancestor. This is a celebration, if you excuse the expression, of muttdom that is just fantastic. It's sort of like I celebrate the variety of me, and I am a rainbow.
And people don't mind.
Yeah.
And it explodes myths of racial purity. But I'm telling you, it's the first time, many people have written to me, it's the first time they've ever seen white people be disappointed if they don't have black ancestors. And think about it. I mean, watch the series. Meryl Streep goes, oh, I want a little black. You know, like, not too much, but a little bit. I had dinner with Brian Sykes last night, and he talked about his black pancreas. You know? But being able to break it down and say, well, you know, this is a Jewish, you know, line and an African line and a da-da-da-da-da, that's quite fascinating. And seeing this as a gumbo, a bouillabaisse, which is what we all are, it's very important that we distinguish, though, between what we're measuring back through time. Ancestry since modernity, which modernity we define as Columbus discovering the New World. That's one kind of measure. 16,000 years is another kind of measure. 50 people walking out of Africa 50,000 years ago is another kind of measure. Human beings evolving 200,000 years ago is another kind of measure. And it's very important that we educate people, that we explain what we're measuring and what the difference is, because everybody says, I always ask everybody before they get the admixture test, do you think you have any African ancestry? And they always say, oh, of course, because we all came from East Africa. Then you have to say, yeah, but that DNA is gone, you know, or not gone, but you have to explain why it will not be present in this, and the difference between recent ancestry and distant ancestry.
Do you think that this
Last question, I got to go see my
Do you
I'd like to hang out with you all day. This is great.
This is an American
But you
question.
can buy my DVD and take
come
me
on! The dean will give you money. You don't think these people don't have any money, actually.
home. George, give everybody a copy of my DVD. You know, go ahead.
So my last question is this a peculiarly American set of values? If you're taking your TV show to France or to China, where everybody is sort of, you know, everybody in France, people really want to be French, and in China, one gets the impression people want to be Han. You know, that's what they want. Is this?
They do.
Yeah. So, is this? Have you just discovered something beautiful to us, but not necessarily beautiful to anybody else?
Well, when that Russian Jewish lady wrote to me, I went to our genealogists, who are the Mormons, you know, because the Mormons basically invented genealogy. The president of the Mormon Church, in case you don't know, had a revelation in the year 1839 that, you know, you might like, you might not, but if they find your ancestors, they believe they can baptize them, and that's true. So they have this, they're like the Borg in Star Trek, you know, and they just eat up all these records. They digitize these records, thank God. So I went to one of our genealogists, who I subsequently fired, and you'll see why, and she said, no, Americans are the only ones who have this passion for genealogy. We're like, please. So I searched the world, and we found out every country has genealogists. All these people. We found Yo-Yo Ma's clan genealogy, which his 7th great uncle started in the year 1767, which traces his family back to his 20th great grandfather, who was born in 1217, 2 years after King John was forced to sign the Magna Carta in Runnymede. You know, do they have a genealogical tradition or not? And all we have to do is tie genealogy to genetics. Genetic, dense genotyping, genetic ancestry tracing, to the normal human impulse for the restoration of one's ancestors. But it is cultural. In Japan, in contrast to China, your book of life, as it were, is destroyed 75 years after your death. All the records, just by law, are destroyed. Yeah, I mean, I find that terrible, but that's a different cultural value. So it is complicated, but I would say that in every, you know, we had Assyrian, we had Queen Noor, we had Mehmed Oz, who's Turkish. They were 2 Muslims. We had Yo-Yo and Christy Yamaguchi. She's Japanese. We had Eva Longoria. We had Stephen Colbert and Mike Nichols and Meryl Streep. And I mean, it represents countries all across the globe. And on the ground, you could do a lot of this research on a computer because of the digitization of the records. But you always have to send a genealogist to local records. And everybody shared the impulse to restore their
So I'm
answers.
wrong. This is not a peculiarly American. This is a deep kind of curiosity that everyone on the earth seems to have.
No, I don't think you're wrong. I think the French do want to find that they're French, but they want to find that they're French, which is the key part of the sentence. Anyway,
All right. May,
thank you.
may the dean
Thank you
put
very
gold
much.
in your pockets.
Good luck. Thank you. See you, bud.
Thank you.